Hi guys, my name's Callum Dicks and you're joining me today at the fabulous Maver sponsored Woodland View Fishery. Now we've had a bit of a frost this morning, but the sun is out and the temperatures are really starting to rise. The forecast saying we could reach up to temperatures of 13, 14 degrees today, and my prediction is the fish are really going to have a go. I'm going to start my day short on hard pellets, which is a great way of starting any match on any commercial fishery. But the whole time that I'm going to be fishing short with hard pellets, I'm going to be loose feeding maggots long to look to try and catch shallow, because that method at this time of year really is a match winning method. And later on in the day, we might even have a little look in the edge to see if we can catch some really big fish. Right, so we've started our day short on hard pellets, which is an absolutely brilliant way of fishing on any commercial fishery to start your match off. There's just something about starting at that distance, 5-6 metres, tapping in a few hard pellets with a kinder pot or even throwing them, that really does give you an initial response to your day. If you can go in on this line and you can nick 20 or 30 pound, and the whole time that you're fishing here you can prime other lines up so that when this line finishes you can go out on them line and continue catching, it really is a brilliant way of starting your match. The one thing I look for when I'm fishing with hard pellets short is exactly where to fish at what distance. Now the one thing for me that's key is that you plumb up and try and find out where the bottom of the slope is. And if you can find the bottom of the slope at a nice distance, i.e. 4, 5, 6 metres, and just come back up 6 inches or just a float length, that really does work well. Because what you do then is you just come off the silt a little bit, and when you're fishing on a slope you do tend to foul look less fish. So that's a really great tip on finding where to fish when you fish short with hard pellets. So I've started off the day just using a little kinder pot. So I'm tapping in maybe 10 to 15 pellets from about 18 inches off the water just to make a little bit of a noise and starting there. But if I'm getting lots of bites and the fishing's really quick and I'm trying to catch a bigger weight, sometimes what you can do is you fish the same line, but you can just start throwing. And the brilliant way of feeding it also is to put your rig in the water, when you hook one, then feed, and then go back out and try and get into that rhythm. So this line really is a great way of starting your match, like I said, and if you can get an initial response, a good initial response, feed the rest of your lines that you're planning on going to next, it's a great way of starting your match. Right, so we've had an initial response really quickly. It amazes me every time when you just tap in 10 to 15 pellets, that's enough bait and enough noise to get quite a few bites and quite a few fish in your peg. Like I said, if you pick the correct line and you plumb up in the right spot and you feed just a little bit of bait, make a little bit of noise, it really is a great way of catching some fish to start your day off. What I'll do, once I'm now in, I've just caught an F1, I'll talk you through my rig really briefly. To start off with, we're fishing with a 6mm hard pellet on the hook on a little banded hair rig. So you want a decent size hook to match the size of the pellet. So I've gone for a size 16 MVR carp hook. We've got a 5-inch 012 hook length, which might seem quite a small hook length, but the water temperatures are still not quite there yet. So 012 really is a nice line for this time of year for when the fish are fighting, not too hard. Going up, we've got 016 MVR rig line. We've got 2 droppers going up to a bulk of number 9s, all number 9 shot from the bulk to the droppers, and we've got some number size 12 trimmers just above the bulk, just to dot the float down. The float itself is a 4x16 sample float, something I'm working on, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about later. The elastic itself is my favourite of all time, the 8 to 11 dual core, which is perfect for all F1 fishing. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll see that that's all I use through a short kit. And the top kit itself is a 1-piece power kit. Like I said, F1 fishing, or if you're fishing for small carp, they really are essential. They make your fishing really efficient. When you're shipping in and you're playing your fish near your keep nets, they pop up really close so you can net your fish really quickly, get it in your keep net and get back out. So a really simple rig, really efficient, get your bait down to the bottom quickly, have a good initial response and catch loads of fish at the beginning of the match. Right guys, we've had a brilliant start to the day, starting short on hard pellets, and we've probably caught an excess of 15 to 20 F1s, 4 or 5 carp. So we've probably got about 40 to 50 pound in the net, which is a great start to any match. But the whole time that I've been fishing short on hard pellets, what I've been doing, I've been loose feeding maggots. And whilst I'm fishing with pellets, I really have felt like the fish are starting to move up in the water now. So I feel where I've been loose feeding maggots are going to have a great run and build a big weight. One great little tip for you is that when you've plumbed your rig up short on your hard pellet line, when you choose the length of line you're going to cut your rig down to, don't cut it too short. Because what you're actually doing, when I'm actually waiting for a bite and I'm looking to strike into fish, or the whole time I'll be picking my catapult up and loose feeding maggots out. Now if you cut your line down between your float and your pole tip down to 4 or 5 inches, there's a really good chance you might move your pole and just jerk your float. So I've done it today, I've actually measured it, I've cut my line down between my pole tip and my float down to 12 inches. Now that's more than enough line that I can pick my catapult up, I can fire my maggots past and not move my float, which is really important. You can get into a great rhythm. You can pot your pellets in, drop your float in, you can be there nice and patient, waiting for a bite and loose feed maggots at the same time. Get into a nice rhythm, loose feeding maggots, catching fish short, have a good run short, go shallow on maggots and have another good run, and you're putting together a match winning weight. One of the things that you might be thinking is, well, when do I swap from short to long? Now there's a couple of things that I do that you've got to try and keep in mind. One thing you've got to do is keep your eyes open. Obviously if there's people around you that have also started short, now they've gone shallow and they're catching a lot better than you, it really does drive you into going into fishing shallow and trying to keep up with them. The other thing that you've got to do is get your timings right. What you've got to remember is that when you're fishing shallow and short on the bottom, in general, the first half of the match, fishing short is going to be good. And then the second half of the match, fishing shallow is going to be really good. So if you can just keep an eye on the clock and think to yourself, if you can drag this short line out for 90 minutes, 2 hours, you really do put yourself in a situation where you're going to have a brilliant second half of the match, especially if you've been really consistent with your feeding. Like I said, if you fish short for 90 minutes, 2 hours, and the whole time that you're fishing short, you've been feeding maggots, when you do go out there, the fish are going to be so confident. They've been feeding for 1.5 hours to 2 hours, so they're going to be really confident. So when you drop in, there's a very good chance that you can catch for the whole of the second half of the match. A lot of the time, when you're fishing competitions, if you get your timings right, what will happen is that you'll feel towards the last 15-20 minutes that you've exhausted your peg. So keep your eyes open, look for other people fishing shallow, and keep an eye on your watch, try and get your timings dead right, and that will put you in a position where you could catch a really big weight and win lots of matches. Right, so we've had a brilliant start to the day short on hard pellets. We've managed to keep catching and keep bites coming for the whole 2 hours there. Now, I've been really consistent when I've been firing my maggots out past my short line. I've been firing maggots at about 11.5 meters for the whole 2 hours. Now, when I was fishing short, I did keep an eye on where the maggots were landing, and I saw a few swirls within the bait. So I was sure that when I went out, I was going to have a good run, but I didn't realise quite as good as this. It really is. There's a lot of fish in my peg. I just carried on firing maggots, fishing with my little 0.15 Finesse 6 float with a 2-foot line between my pole tip and my float, laying my rig in, feeding really aggressively with maggots. I'm trying to keep my pole as still as possible whilst I was fishing because the sun's out and it's creating a shadow on the water, so just trying to keep it as still as possible whilst I'm feeding and whilst I'm fishing, and it really is. Oh, just a little roach that time, but we probably had 5 to 6 F1s straight away as soon as going out. Now, one of the things you've got to remember is that when you've started your match short and you've managed to catch for 2 hours, if you can just keep this line ticking along keep some F1s going in the net and maybe an odd decent carp, you really are building a weight. You're getting yourself into a situation where you're catching for the whole 5 hours of the match. So what I've been doing, I've just been shipping out, flicking my rig in, keeping my pole tip as still as possible, trying to keep that shadow as still as possible, firing virtually a whole pouch full of maggots as tightly around my float as possible. I'm not making too much noise in my rig, I'm just laying it in, not slapping it, not making too much commotion. And I've basically, since I've been out, been getting a bite of chuck. There we go, straight in there. Another decent F1. One thing you might be able to see is that there's a couple of ducks in my peg. A lot of people tend to try and scare the ducks away when they're fishing, but it really is a brilliant thing to have ducks feeding in your peg whilst you're fishing when you're fishing shallow. Not only do they create a little bit of ripple on the water, I'm sure the fish feed more confidently underneath ducks. So if you can keep them in your peg whilst you're fishing shallow, it really will increase your catch rate. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to try and get this one in for you because it really is a decent F1, and I'll talk you through my rig. There we go, another great big F1, massive. They are massive now in Woodland View. It's a ghosty one, that one. Just get the hook out nice and quickly for you. Right, so I'll start right at the bottom. To start off with, we've got a size 16 Maver Elite ES43 hook, which is a really wide gate, which is important for when you're fishing with maggots. You don't want a narrow gate because it increases the chance of the maggot going back over the point. Again, we've got a 5-inch hook length 012 MVR hook length mono. Going up again, the main line itself is 016 MVR rig mono with 4 strung out number 10 shot. Now this is really important when you're fishing shallow because you want to be laying your rig in and trying to get it to fall as slow as possible. If you're down in a bulk, it would sink a lot quicker and you get a lot less bites. The float is probably the most important thing about the rig. This is a Maver Finesse 6 1.5, so it only takes 4 number 10 shot. You want a float that is as light as possible. Now, one really important thing is that when we were fishing short, I touched on how the length of line between your float and your pole tip. Again, when you're fishing shallow, this is really important. So a lot of people tend to find when they're fishing for F1 shallow, they'll fish with really short lines. But this time of year, when the water clarity isn't up to summer level yet, and the sun's out and there's shadows from your pole, a lot of the time fishing with a longer line between your pole tip and your float is really good. So today I'm starting off at 2 foot. I'm starting at 2 foot deep with a 2 foot line. So the rig itself is 4 foot. Now this is a great starting point. If you're missing lots of bites, you can just shorten it down to give yourself a little bit more a tighter connection to the float. The elastic itself, I've just gone down the size of an elastic, so now I've gone to the 6 to 9 dual core. The last thing you want is when you're hooking the fish, them splashing on the surface. So a slightly lighter elastic will just keep them down under the water surface and keep the commotion down. And the top kit itself is a one-piece power kit, exactly the same as what I was using short, but I've gone for the smoke colour on this one. Obviously you're fishing within 2 foot of the surface of the water, so a smoke kit will keep it a little bit more camouflaged. Quite a simple rig, but really effective this time of year fishing shallow with maggots. Right, we've gone long, and I know we're pleasure fishing, but even I'm surprised in just how many fish are in my peg. It's absolutely ridiculous. I'm firing in a whole big pouch full of maggots and laying my rig in right in the middle of it and basically catching a big F1 every single drop. One thing I do want to touch on though is shallow fishing in general. When you watch the very best anglers at it, they're extremely active with their feeding. You'll never really see them put the catapult down. One of the best routines I've got into today is that once I get a fish in, I bait up, put a fresh couple of maggots on every single time, and then just before I'm about to ship out is fire a real big pouch full in. Now I think what happens when you hook a fish, you're playing it, the time that it takes you to get the fish in, especially if they're decent size F1s, the fish disperse. If you bait up, get nice and ready to ship out, fire some bait in, use your ducks as a marker, and then go and lay your rig in straight in that pouch full of bait as quick as you can. A lot of the time what will happen, you'll drop your rig in like that, you'll go to pick your catapult up, you'll feed again, and by the time you fed, you've got another fish on, just like that. I know that was only a roach, but it just shows it perfectly. And then you can feed again and repeat the process. So one great thing, one great tip that you need to be doing when you're fishing shallow is being really active with your catapult. Try and feed as much as possible. Keep the fish in your peg for as long as possible and try and get them as shallow as possible, because of what will happen, the shallower you catch, the bigger the fish be in general. Use the ducks to your advantage, and that really is a way of catching a big weight and winning a lot of matches. Right, so we've ended up fishing for 4.5 hours, and I knew shallow with maggots today could be a really good method, because a lot of the matches I've been fishing recently, that's been the winning method. But I didn't quite realise it was going to be this good. It is absolutely ridiculous. If I get my timings right with how often I'm feeding and how quickly I ship out, get my rig dead right with a 2-foot line, I'm just hooking a decent F1 every single chuck. It really is incredible fishing. This little bit of sun today has really made the fish come up off the bottom and feed heavily, and there's no other better bait than maggots for when they do that. The size of the F1s has been unbelievable. But one thing I do feel like I've got dead right today is when I was fishing short, I've managed to eke that out for 2 hours, and I was ultra consistent with when I was feeding my maggots, holding my pole short, waiting for a bite, but feeding twice or even 3 times every chuck. And then by the time I went out and fished shallow with maggots, it's been unbelievable. The peg really has been solid. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video from today. It really is a great time of year to get out on the bank and catch loads of fish. The sun's out and the fish are really feeding. I hope you've enjoyed some of the tips, and I hope it catches you a lot more fish. Just remember, keep fishing, keep practicing, and you'll catch loads more fish.